Hello and welcome to Budgeting for Managers. I'm instructor Chris Culver, and I wanted to go very briefly through this formula sheet that goes through the various ways of working with the cost volume profit formulas. And you will find this formula sheet in Moodle in week 3 in the lecture handouts. And it's basically all of the formulas on a single PDF sheet. And I thought I would use just some very simple numerical examples to step through this. So I'll pause just briefly so that you can print this sheet out and have it accessible to you. Okay, we're going to use some terms here: fixed cost, variable cost, contribution margin, and all of these terms are sort of laid out in a previous video and also in a PowerPoint presentation. And so I would encourage you to make sure that you've visited those before you visit this video, because in order to understand this concept, you need to understand fixed costs and variable costs, and so make sure that you've done that work in advance. So cost volume profit or break-even analysis is really, I think it's a wonderful tool. It's a way of trying to understand your costs and being able to calculate then production levels or break-even amounts so that you can evaluate ideas or help us in the decision-making process. And so, for example here, I'm going to assume that our fixed costs are 10 and our price is 5 and our variable cost is 3. And so if you have this sheet printed, you probably just write these in above the terms or whatnot. And so you can see that if my price is 5 and my variable cost is 3, my contribution margin per unit is 2. And with the first the first unit that I produce, I kind of create a $2 contribution margin, which when I apply that to my fixed cost of 10, I've got 2 to contribute towards the 10, and so I'm only losing $8. And then with the second unit I produce, I have 2 contribution margins, or $4 to contribute towards my fixed costs, and I'm losing just 6. And so this is in essence linear algebra that's going on here. So when you were in middle school or high school and you were like, oh my God, when are we ever going to use this crap? Well, now you know. We're going to use it in budgeting and accounting and looking at costs. So to calculate my break-even, I have a fixed cost of 10 and my contribution margin is 2. So after 5 units, I'll have enough $2 contribution margins to cover my fixed costs, and I will not be losing any money. I'll be covering my variable costs and covering my fixed costs, and so I will break even at 5 units. Now, lots of times, the production people want the break-even cost in units because they want to know, well, how many of these things do we need to make? And 5 of them is the answer in this case. But the marketing department doesn't work in units often. They work in sales dollars. So they're like, well, what does the sales revenue need to be? And that's a pretty easy calculation because that's just price times quantity. So that's 5 units at $5 for a break-in revenue or break-in sales target of $25. So one method gets us there in units, and then we can convert to sales dollars by just multiplying price times quantity. An alternative way to work with this is to use the contribution margin ratio, which will get us the break even in revenue sort of more directly. And so skip beyond the break-even revenue, the fixed cost divided by the contribution margin ratio, and look at what the contribution margin ratio is. It's the contribution margin per unit divided by the revenue per unit. So in this case, 2 over 5, which will give us 40% or 0.4. And so when we put the fixed cost of 10 and divide by 0.4, we get the $25 sales revenue immediately. we come out with the $25, and if we wanted to divide by the sales price of 5, we could get back to the 5 units, and we can work forward and backwards from units to revenue, or from revenue to units with either method. Now, I like to use the unit method at the margins when I'm just thinking about making, business decisions. And lots of times, if you're doing a full cost study and you're graphing, costs over time, and you're looking at, maybe you're using the high-low method or the sum of the least squares to get some kind of understanding of your cost behavior, you're probably going to work into the contribution margin ratio method, because your numbers are going to be better suited for that method. Just a little bit about these, sort of cost methods and how they work. I think at first, people are a little bit perplexed because the numbers in the formulas are somewhat complex, but when we sort of use these simple numbers, you can start to see how they work and how they come together. So we generally don't just want to break even. It's generally not any business person's aspiration to just get back to zero. I'd like to work really hard and put my money at risk and, live a complicated life, all for the purposes of just ending up where I started. And so instead, we want to have a profit of some sort. And there's a lot of different ways of trying to figure out your profit. One common way is to do some kind of return on assets calculation. So if you have, $100 million deployed in a business, you probably want to, get a 17 or 20 or percent return on assets, or that may be the return that is required of shareholders. That determining of the interest rates that need to be used and required returns and all of that, that's all a subject of a finance class. And so that's really what you do in a finance class. You start to become intimately familiar with required rates of returns and evaluating projects and things of that nature. But let's assume here that we want a 20% return on fixed assets. Again, an attempt to try to keep the numbers fairly simple, which you would never really do a 20% return on fixed assets or fixed costs, because you'd want to do a 20% return on total capital invested. But again, trying to keep the numbers fairly simple. So a 20% return on fixed costs would be 20% of 10, which would be $2. So my fixed cost would be 10, and my targeted profit would be 2, for a total of 12, and divided by my original contribution margin per unit of 2, which means I would need 6 units in order to achieve my targeted profit in this case. And if I wanted to turn that into sales revenue dollars, that would be 6 units at $5 for a total revenue of 30 in order to achieve my goals in this particular case. Now, one of the other things that's useful with this tool is sometimes people will have business ideas, or they'll do projections, and one of the things that can happen is that the targeted sales dollars, or what you need, can be more than your ability to produce. Imagine these numbers are millions instead of, single digit numbers. So imagine I need to produce 6 million units, or I need to produce 30 million in sales. Well, if I need to produce 6 million units to get to my goals, but my production facility's maximum capacity, if I run it 24/7, 365 days a year, is 4.5 million units, I'm never going to make it. And so sometimes people set up a model that just won't work because they haven't penciled the numbers enough, and so they end up fighting sort of an uphill battle that's never gonna work out. And so I really love to use this cost volume profit tool with anybody who's going to start a business or is thinking about starting a business, to try to look at the numbers in several different ways or from several different angles to figure out what we need to do. So to make it even a little bit more complicated, you generally don't want to have your return, your return on assets be just pre-tax. You want it to be after tax. And so here's the formula for after-tax targeted profit, and it's not really break even anymore because we're not breaking even. We're doing something well above that, which is why we tend to refer to this as cost volume profit analysis as opposed to break even analysis. But most practitioners will kind of use the terms interchangeably. But let's imagine that we still have our fixed costs of 10 and we still want that 20% return on assets, but we want it after taxes, and we're in a 50% marginal tax bracket. Now, a 50% marginal tax bracket, it's a little bit high. For an Oregon corporation, it would be 30 because you'd be at least at 21 or 22% federal and 9% for the state. But it's not unreasonably high. There are certainly jurisdictions around where you could be in a 50% marginal tax bracket. Now, I've chosen 50% once again because I want to keep the math super simple. So if I need a targeted profit of 20 after taxes, 20% after taxes, which would be 2, then I'm going to put the fixed cost, the 10 plus the 2, and I'm going to divide the 2 by 1 minus 0.5, which 1 minus 0.5 is going to give us 0.5, and when I take the 2 and divide by 0.5, it's going to make it 4. And so my fixed costs are going to be 10 plus the 4, which will get me to 14. And when I divide that by 2, now I'm going to need 7 units. And so I'm going to produce 7 units, and I'm going to sell those at 5, which is going to cause my sales number now to be 35. And I'm going to lose my fixed costs and my variable costs. And then I'm going to have my total revenue, and then I'm going to lose my tax. And when I'm all done with that, I'm going to achieve my target then of my targeted profit, so that it's an after-tax targeted profit. Now, I've kind of, in some ways it seems like maybe I've oversimplified this, right? 10, 5, and 3, and 2, and I've made all the math work out to be super simple so that we can, you can sort of diagram this and watch it happen as we go through the formulas. But the math doesn't necessarily make it harder, right? I mean, you can have big numbers, you can have, contribution margins of $2.45. You can have tax rates of 36% instead of 50%. But you still kind of plug and chug the formulas the same way, and what's happening is similar also. Now, there are broader implications here in terms of how much fixed cost you want to take on, variable costs. How do you figure out what your fixed costs are and what your variable costs are, and those are kind of taken care of in some of the other videos in the preceding PowerPoint and whatnot. But I just wanted to step you through in kind of a simple way using these formulas. And I would encourage you to make sure you print this sheet. It's probably a good one to have laying around just because you're going to be doing some homework and working with this as we progress through the term. So thanks for joining in here for just a few minutes, and I hope you found this helpful, and we'll catch you in the next interaction. Take care.